The story begins with the girl receiving permission to fulfill her wish. But before that, the performer asked if she really wanted it. The distinguished family was having lunch when one of the servants, by order of His Highness, came to deliver the sad news. Their army had surrendered to the Empire of Charles, and the Emperor was to be expected tomorrow at lunchtime. All 5 princesses must be present at this welcoming ceremony. Older sister Riley, having already accepted the inevitable, knew that they had no right to refuse. The princess asked the servant to tell her father that they understood everything. The other sister was indignant, because she had heard rumors that Emperor Carlo was a cold-blooded and ruthless tyrant, a bloodthirsty ruler. He had overthrown his own brother to take the throne for himself. The princess was convinced that such a man would show no mercy to a defeated and weak country. She also heard rumors that the emperor was planning to take one of them hostage and make her his empress. The girl would rather die than marry someone like him. She urged her older sister Riley not to be silent. Another sister, who didn't look like the others, assumed that dinner was over, so she wanted to be the first to leave the table. The sister who had started this conversation about the emperor's plans was angry that Liliana was acting as if it was none of her business. However, the girl quickly left the room to avoid a scandal. While Liliana was waiting at the door, a servant met her to inform her that her father was waiting for the princess and offered to take her to him. The princess realized that the time had come. Right now, the one being held hostage would not be her dear sister Riley, nor would any of the other sisters, because the hostage would be Liliana. This is the place they are talking about. The world of the novel, The Princess with the Pink Hair, will not be abandoned. Obviously, the princess with the pink hair is Liliana. While she was thinking about this, the maid tried to cheer her up. Sophia assured me that becoming empress in a powerful empire was the way to go, and that it would be much better there than here. But if Liliana were the main female character, there would be nothing to worry about. The gorgeous main character with pink hair will touch the heart of the arrogant emperor and will be everyone's favorite, at a time when Liliana herself must die according to the plot. She became the mother of the main character, who would die young shortly after giving birth. In stories about parents, the main character's mother usually dies early and appears in the future only in flashbacks. And instead of improving the situation, Liliana's future will be this. She will be taken from her home and made a hostage of Emperor Helio Carlo. The girl will not receive a single drop of love from the arrogant emperor, who is also the father of the main character, and will die immediately after giving birth. It all started with the small kingdom of Nieda, which produced high-quality magic stones. For some unknown reason, during trade negotiations with the empire, it raised the prices of magic stones. The Empire of Charles made several remarks, but this did not change anything. Shortly after this, it declared war. The result of the war between the powerful power of the empire and the small kingdom was obvious. Emperor Carlo was willing to show mercy to King Nieda, but only on condition that the king would give up one of his daughters to become empress. In return, Emperor Helio will not blame the kingdom of Niet for the conflict. Since the king was guided by reckless greed, he had to lose one of his daughters, a hostage of the empire. Shortly before, after dinner, her father had called Liliana to talk and told her that she would be going to Carlo's empire. He had 5 daughters, but she had been chosen. And all because Liliana was born to a commoner, a maid. She is the so-called forgotten princess who received no love and attention. And if she doesn't escape the kingdom, she'll remain a forgotten princess locked away in the palace. But if she's taken away, she'll die after giving birth. Liliana tried to convince herself that she had more than just this election. The emperor was due to arrive tomorrow afternoon, so the princess still had a chance. She asked Sophia to gather some unnecessary tablecloths and curtains. At midnight, Liliana used them to sneak out of the estate through a window. There weren't many people in the northern part of the palace, apart from the stables. As Liliana had expected, there were only 3 people, but to her surprise, the chamberlain was among them. Normally, a man shouldn't be in a place like this at this late hour. Besides him, there was also the groom there, as well as a third mysterious stranger. The guest asked if the king was asleep, to which the chamberlain replied that a servant had already gone to him with a message, and so the king would later meet a mysterious stranger. Liliana noticed that the man was quite attractive and assumed that he was a nobleman. But now is not the time to admire the beauty, because while these 3 are talking, she needs to get out of here. And although the girl has not been treated very well, she is still from the royal family. Getting some money for the jewelry she had brought with her wouldn't seem like a difficult task. Liliana could already imagine saying goodbye to everyone, throwing off her shackles, and setting off in search of her own happiness. But to do this, you need to get a horse and cross the border without revealing your identity, and then Liliana won't have to die after giving birth, like in the original novel. Before leaving for the palace, the guest asked to pay special attention to his horse, as this animal was very valuable to him. The groom assured His Highness that he didn't need to worry, because in Niet they mix magic stones into the horse feed, after which they become even healthier than they are now. At this time, Liliana sneaked into the stable to steal one of the horses. His Highness emphasized that his horse was very sensitive, and therefore the groom must make sure that the animal was comfortable in its new place. The horse began to kick after Liliana approached it and tried to saddle it. This sound drew the attention of the three men to Liliana. His Highness inquired about the identity of the girl who wanted to steal his horse. It was then that the princess realized that she'd been caught red-handed. The servant shouted loudly, and Liliana saddled her horse with a look of despair on her face. Although the girl does not feel hatred for the chamberlain, she simply wants to live. She was about to leave the palace, but the tall man standing behind the servant was clever and jumped in beside her. The guards shouted one after another. Liliana tightened her grip on the reins in anger. If she was caught like this, the surveillance would only intensify, and she wouldn't be able to escape. She blamed herself for not having made a proper plan because of her haste. But what the princess hated most was the man behind her. He reminded Liliana that this horse was special to him, and that even though she was the princess of this kingdom, she should not be so reckless in stealing the emperor's horse. Liliana was shocked to find herself facing the one person she wanted to avoid, Helio Carlo. He is the young emperor and the father of the main character. According to the plot, it is he who Liliana is supposed to marry. The girl sat thoughtfully on her horse until His Highness offered her a hand. He remarked that if Liliana was going to sit like this for the rest of her life, despite his stamina, it was unlikely that his horse would last long. The princess noted that the emperor was not known for his pleasant disposition, but she accepted the help and apologized for her behavior on their first meeting. What could Liliana do against the emperor of the empire, Carlo? He immediately understood that the girl was planning to escape. This led Lilian into a dead end, after which the chamberlain decided to save her. He awkwardly began to make excuses, saying that the princess wanted to take a walk at night, because she couldn't sleep because of excitement. Although His Highness could not believe that the princess had decided to do this to his horse, he did not dwell on the subject. He remarked that if they met under such circumstances, then it was fate. The emperor said he had come to meet Liliana's father. The audience hall of the royal palace was silent. King Nieta stood in front of the throne with 5 princesses lined up behind him. Behind them, His Highness's servants, maids, and knights surrounded the hall. Helio sat on his throne, his legs crossed as if it were natural. He looked only 25, but he inspired a sense of fear that could overwhelm an audience. Helio leaned on his arm and thoughtfully watched the defeated royal family. His Highness remarked that he wanted to share something interesting that he had witnessed. But first, Helio Carlo decided to find out, and asked the king which of his daughters he planned to send to Carlo. Helio reminded them of their agreement. The king of Nieta looked at his beloved eldest daughter, Princess Riley. She was an honorary daughter who could become queen in the future. This was absolutely impossible. Then he looked at the second, third, and even the 4th princess, but he could not let them go. They were all his dearest daughters, whom he loved so much that he could not do anything about it. Then the king remarked that it was an honor for him, and he was going to send his most beloved daughter, Liliana. Liliana, standing behind King Nieta, had a face like she was chewing shit at those words. What did he mean by adoration? He didn't even know her name until today. The king added that she was his daughter, but very beautiful and intelligent. The emperor said that this princess was about to escape from the palace, but ran into him. Helio Carlo suggested that Liliana wanted to escape to prevent her marriage to him. The king of Nieta was confused. He tried to justify his daughter's action, because it was completely unlike her. In Helio's voice, it sounded as natural as saying that the sky was above one's head and the earth was beneath one's feet. This made the king of Nieta even more ashamed, but there was nothing he could do. His Highness noted that he had given the king too much freedom, in the form of the opportunity to choose the princess himself. He was offended that this princess had tried to abandon her homeland and flee because she did not want to become the emperor's wife. Therefore, Helio Carlo suggested that he had been too merciful to the defeated nation. He would have no complaints if he had chosen his own wife? The king began to bow to the emperor and apologize for the act of his beloved daughter. It seemed to Helio that the king himself did not believe what he was saying, but he decided to pity him. Helio looked back and looked at Liliana's pink hair. Then he laughed softly. Everyone flinched as the sound echoed through the quiet hall. The man before them could have destroyed this country at any moment. The reason he didn't was simple, because he didn't have to go that far. Helio watched with great ease as Liliana's thin eyebrows furrowed. This alone clearly showed that the king of Nieta was lying. It didn't matter which princess he took. If the kingdom, which was brought to ruin, was liberated for nothing, the entire continent would look down on the empire. Therefore, such a development was dangerous for the empire. Besides, Helio needed a woman to become empress. It would be good if it was a woman who was not related to the empire, so it didn't matter which princess he took. If possible, it would be better if it was Princess Riley, who was the king's favorite and had the highest rank in the line of succession. However, if Liliana is the daughter the king cherishes above all else, then he must grant the inheritance of the kingdom of Nieta to the child born to the emperor and Liliana. The audience hall was filled with astonishment. There were no cases of the right of succession being passed on to the children of a princess who had married into another country, or even to a third child. There were 4 other princesses in their country. However, as has been said many times, the kingdom of Niet was on the verge of destruction, so even this had to be accepted as a mercy from the emperor. Helio remarked that it wasn't necessarily the first turn, the third would be fine. The king reluctantly bowed and said he would do anything. The emperor suggested that they should proceed with the wedding as they had planned, and suggested that 3 days would be enough. Time passed quickly, and the day of the ceremony arrived. Liliana and Sophia were amazed, having never seen such a carriage before. The maid remarked that it looked even better than the one used by the late queen. Liliana felt too heavy to step into such a carriage, so she had to muster up courage. She was very embarrassed when she sat down in her seat, for she felt as if the soft cushion would eat her. Sophia, her close maid, boarded the same carriage to accompany Liliana. As luxurious as the carriage was, the journey was difficult, and sitting in one position for so long made her thighs tremble. Sophia understood the saying that it is better to be the tail of a dragon than the head of a snake. Liliana pointed out that she would not become queen, hence her position. The maid thought that the emperor had fallen in love with the princess at first sight. Liliana was shocked by such words because there was not even a hint of this from Heliocarlo. The emperor appeared out of nowhere in front of the girls. He immediately understood that they were talking about him. His Highness smiled and declared that the princess was spreading rumors even before the wedding. The emperor also asked if the girl was planning to run away again, since she had already earned a reputation as a fugitive. Liliana thought she had prepared well, but in the end, she said she wasn't going to do it. Even if she managed to escape, she wouldn't be able to survive on her own. Liliana is not sure who the emperor thinks she is, but she has lived her whole life as a princess. Liliana cannot sew or clean, so with her skills, no one will hire her for a job. The princess would probably have starved to death, trying to survive in the forest on berries and rainwater. The emperor noticed that the girl had thought through everything to the last detail. Although Liliana knows how to cook, she only does it on a gas stove. Still, the princess decided to admit that she is stupid. Heliocarlo looked at the girl carefully and pointed out that she had suddenly started saying strange things. Liliana began to explain awkwardly that she had not meant that. However, the princess is convinced that she will be of no use as a hostage. Until it came to the marriage, her father, King Nieti, could not even remember her name properly. Therefore, whether the emperor takes the girl or not, she believes that she does not pose a serious danger to the kingdoms. In fact, Liliana was more timid than she was acting now. She lived as a shadow in the kingdom, so it was only natural for her to be like that. As the memories of her past life returned to her, the world expanded, and she naturally became bolder. The woman proved to be braver than Helio had thought. He replied, puzzled, that in the end, it was up to him to decide who to make his empress. Liliana was definitely not the type to make such decisions. Moreover, if she bears His Highness a child, she will become the ruler of the empire, and then the girl will not be just a stupid princess. Helio added that it was impossible to predict how the world would change in the future, so Liliana should not start with self-flagellation. His Highness smiled and said goodbye, noting that they would see each other in the empire. Given this, Sophia once again stated that Liliana liked the emperor. However, for the girl, this turn of events is even worse. In the original story, Helio and Liliana had 2 children. Both times the reason was politics. They lost their first child in an accident during pregnancy, and the second child was born while Liliana was still recovering, after which she died. The girl would never wish such a death for herself, and so she will do everything in her power to ensure that the emperor does not even want to look at her. Helio, watching the princess's carriage, thought of asking the knight if he had ever tried to raise a squirrel. When the emperor was still a child, he had seen one at his cousin's. Out of curiosity, Helio treated the animal to nuts and cookies, but it couldn't fit everything behind its cheeks. So at some point the squirrel froze in place. The knight remarked that it was a nice story. He too had once thought of bringing a squirrel home. Helio continued to think about how the animal tries to understand something with its tiny head. The emperor thinks that squirrels also have a brave side. Helio, equating Liliana with this animal, realized that he had not expected the princess to tell him directly that she was of little use. His Highness even suggested that he would definitely not be bored watching the girl. Suddenly, the crew stopped, and Liliana did not immediately understand what was happening. Then, the princess and Sophia looked out the window and saw that they had finally arrived in Carlo's empire. The crew was met by many people who were in anticipation of meeting the future empress. Sophia's expression grew even more frantic. Sophia was a very good servant. It would have been a difficult decision for her to come. Liliana, stepping out of the carriage, tripped over her own leg and almost fell. However, Helio instantly grabbed the princess's hand, preventing her from being embarrassed. The girl admired the scenery. Compared to the empire, Nieta was just a tiny country. Her father tried to raise the price of magic stones for Carlo and even decided on war. Helio, tearing the princess from her dreams, said that the servants would escort the girl to the Emerald Palace where she would stay. He warned that the palace was not very large, but Liliana would feel comfortable. The girl was confused by this, as the palace looked as if one could easily get lost there. So it was natural that Liliana entered the Emerald Palace in confusion. The maid waiting on the princess stepped forward and held out an envelope from the emperor himself. A brief note was written in cursive on a board decorated with gold leaf. Helio decided to warn Liliana not to even think about running away, because she was being followed by her maids, who were actually guards. The princess realized that her plans had gone awry. But since Liliana has come this far, she needs to stick to the method that is her only option. She asked Sophia if she could get her some medicine. The maid was worried that the princess was unwell. Liliana asked Sophia to come closer so that no one would hear, because she meant the medicine that would prevent pregnancy. Sophia exclaimed in panic that she would not do this. However, Liliana began to beg her because she did not want to have children at all. The maid grabbed the princess by the shoulders and, looking her carefully in the eyes, noted that such drugs were very difficult to obtain. But even if she manages to buy them on the black market, she won't be able to find out what they actually contain. Sophia asked the lady to come to her senses, because they could make her sick with something much worse. Liliana agreed to accept this fact because medicine here is not as well developed as in the modern world. The princess understands Sophia's feelings, but still, if she had to choose between dying after giving birth to the main character and being poisoned with questionable drugs, the second option is much closer to her. Liliana stared at Sophia with her pleading pink eyes, trying to convince her. However, the maid was adamant, and no matter how much the princess looked at her, she still wouldn't agree to this. Sophia noted that Liliana would probably be very lonely in the empire, and with a child, at least she would have company. Moreover, the king of Nieta had agreed to give her the right to inherit. This means that there will be no disputes over the succession to the throne in the empire, and the princess will not have to worry about the future of her child. The maid made Liliana think. The girl couldn't sleep at night because her mind was filled with thoughts about the future. The heroine of the original story was not sent back to Nieta. As a perfumer, she stood out and managed to earn the emperor's favor. Before that, Liliana had been treated more like a burden in the palace. The girl realized that the heroine reminded her of herself in many ways when she was young. She shook her head, trying to push these obsessive thoughts out of her head and finally focus on her life. Liliana planned to somehow get the drugs, or to make sure that the emperor would not pay any attention to her. After all, she definitely wasn't going to die after giving birth to the child, like in the original. And the girl made this decision yesterday, and today the Dowager Empress wants to see her. Since Liliana has been resting since her arrival, now is the right time for an official meeting with Helio's mother, that is, her mother-in-law. Liliana was already worried that she would have to see her every day. However, the maid reassured the princess, saying that the Dowager Empress did not approve of such a thing. But still, she would have to come to such meetings, provided that Liliana was invited. Even though it was arranged for the sake of congratulations, the princess still couldn't find a place for herself. Liliana was very surprised that the maid took her somewhere in the forest, and not to Her Highness's palace. However, it was a small garden, since the Dowager Empress loves nature and has created such beauty near her palace. There were large, mighty trees there, so it was hard to understand where they came from, or whether they had been growing there for several decades, and the chirping of birds from under the greenery could be heard all too clearly. Naturally, the Empress Dowager's palace was at least twice the size of the Emerald Palace. The princess went inside and noticed that the Empress Dowager was sitting and staring thoughtfully out the window. Liliana immediately bowed and said she was honored to meet Her Highness. The Dowager Empress invited Princess Nieta to sit next to her. The girl silently watched Her Highness and noticed the obvious resemblance to Helio. The Dowager Empress assumed that Liliana must have had a hard time making the journey from such a distant kingdom. The princess pointed out that it wasn't quite so, as His Highness the Emperor had been very kind to her and let them lose the war. However, Liliana considers it an honor that thanks to the kindness Helio, they were able to save their homeland. Her Highness understands the princess's feelings because she too was once accepted into the empire as a bride from another country. Liliana was very surprised that the Dowager Empress was also a political hostage who became the emperor's companion. It turns out that the lady became part of the imperial family at a young age, just like Liliana. And she always missed her homeland, which was a peaceful place full of sunlight and lush vegetation. And although the body of the young empress ended up in Carlo, her heart always dreamed of home. In her youth, Her Highness often fell into depression and passionately wanted to return, because she always missed her homeland. The same was true after the birth of Prince Helio. The future emperor chased his mother, who was always looking for something else, alone, but in the end he gave in. And so now the lady suggests that it was because of him that he grew up without knowing a mother's love. And the rift in the relationship between mother and son only grew with each passing day. And it remained the same even now, when Helio took the throne, and his mother took the position of Empress Dowager. Her Highness noticed Liliana's confusion, so she decided to change the subject. The Dowager Empress inquired directly about the girl. She was simply trying to reassure the princess that the emperor wasn't so bad. Although Helio seemed too cold, the Dowager Empress asked the girl to try to understand him. Liliana knew that in the original story, the relationship between the emperor and his mother was not very warm. Now the girl seems to regret her actions towards her son. Liliana again noted that Helio had been kind to her. Her Highness gracefully took a sip of her tea and laughed, and then replied that she had heard the princess already having casual conversations. Liliana was embarrassed because who could spread such rumors? However, anyone could understand that the relationship between her and the emperor looked more like prey to a predator. The Dowager Empress suggested that Lilian have tea together at least sometimes. After all, it would be nice for her to chat about various things with her daughter-in-law from time to time. Lilian, unable to contain her joy, agreed to this adventure. Although it is usually said that it is better not to see one's mother-in-law too often. Her Highness added that she would like to hear something interesting about the life of the emperor. At this time, Helio Carlo entered his mother's palace with a gloomy grimace. He had come to pay his respects, but he did not expect to see Liliana there at all. Her Highness replied that she had personally invited the princess because she believed she too should pay homage. The emperor expected his mother to show interest in his wife. Liliana felt a chill. She didn't think that communication between mother and son could be so icy. The girl decided to quickly run away so as not to disturb their conversation. The Dowager Empress and the Emperor looked at the princess indifferently, then continued to argue. Helio noted that his mother had never paid attention to state affairs or his work. Her Highness replied that she had decided to start doing so. However, the Emperor thought it was more likely because the princess was as much a hostage as his mother had been. Helio dryly replied to the Dowager Empress that she could do whatever she wanted, but she should not even hope to return to her homeland. The woman looked with great sadness at her son's footsteps. Liliana desperately wanted to escape from the awkward and at the same time cruel situation between son and mother. The maids tried to stop the princess because it was forbidden to run around the palace. Liliana was so deep in her thoughts that she didn't see the girl in front of her and knocked her down. After that, she grabbed her nose and apologized for not looking where she was going. The injured red-haired lady was not one of the timid dozen. She immediately started shouting, "Who dared to knock the future empress off her feet?" The maids helped Liliana up, after which she apologized to the red-haired lady. The princess did not immediately realize that the victim called herself the empress, and therefore at first she was quite embarrassed. The maid whispered to Liliana that the girl in front of her was a respected daughter of the Duchy of Gaviel and a candidate for empress. Lady Visty Gaviel had a rather stern face and exuded hostility. Liliana began to remember something. In the novel, only one person could be called an empress, and that was Visty Gaviel. She was the villain who pestered the main character. And it is Visty Gaviel who is the main culprit in the termination of the first pregnancy. However, Liliana doubts that the girl has already been officially recognized as the empress. Visty Gaviel pointed her fan at Liliana and demanded that she answer her question. She wondered what kind of impudent girl was in front of her that had almost knocked her off her feet. Liliana stood there as if frozen, as she was furious that Visty Gaviel was acting as if she were already part of the imperial family. So the maid dared to introduce the princess to the duchess. She also noted that it was Liliana who would become the wife of His Highness the Emperor. Visty Gaviel smiled sarcastically, but guessed that she was talking about the princess of the ruined kingdom of Nieta. Liliana stood there silently and embarrassed, not wanting to let Vesta drag her into a pointless argument. Since the candidates for empress held a higher position than she did, Liliana was a hostage of a defeated country, so even if she became the emperor's wife, she would not be treated properly. Even if she was respected, it could not compare to a true empress. Princess Nieta bowed to Visty and apologized for her inattention, also giving her name. Liliana assumed that the duchess was probably looking for the emperor, so she gave her directions. Visty Gaviel told the princess not to worry, as she was here to see the Emerald Palace. She wanted to appreciate the palace that His Highness had decided to give away. The duchess wondered if it seemed rather mediocre to Liliana, since her estate at home was much more refined, to which the princess replied that she was grateful to the emperor for any gift, large or small. Visty Gaviel noticed that Liliana looked defiant, as this was one of the few imperial palaces, although the girl herself could not understand why she was defiant. In any case, the girl replied that it was much better than staying in Nieta. Visty cheekily remarked that it couldn't even compare to some tiny kingdom like Nieta. The duchess knew that the emperor had made Liliana his hostage, but she did not understand why he would marry a princess who had nothing to do with anyone else. And so Liliana stood silently and tried to understand what Visty was leaning towards, but it turned out that she simply did not like the fact that His Highness had decided to make her, Princess Nieta, his wife. And so Visty tries to show Liliana her place. Although the princess didn't even intend to compete with the duchess and pointed it out to the one who was just heading to her room. After which, Visty Gaviel slapped Liliana, considering her behavior impudent. After all, how could a petty princess allow herself to sigh in front of the future empress? Visty reminded the girl that she was nobody here, just a prisoner of war. Liliana, holding her cheek, remarked that a parasite like Mrs. Gaviel could not behave like an empress and swung at her. The noble lady had never seen anyone raise a hand against her. She was so surprised that she froze and then even stepped back. Seeing that Visty Gaviel was ready to receive a slap in return, Liliana abruptly withdrew her hand and noted that she was simply picking up a fly, after which she decided to simply leave. Visty glared angrily at the princess and promised to get even with her. Sophia was worried about what had happened to her mistress. She noticed that her face was already red and swollen. So the maid immediately hurried for medicine and ice. She was afraid to assume that this was what the Dowager Empress had done to her mistress. However, Liliana assured her that she shouldn't worry about her and asked to be left alone to rest. Sophia asked again if the princess was really okay. Liliana smiled and replied that she had simply bumped into something, although her cheek was very sore. At one point, the princess thought she should have replied to the duchess in kind, but on the other hand, it was for the best that she didn't. After all, she was just a consort. Nothing good would happen if Liliana hit the future empress. She doesn't want to give birth, but she also doesn't want to be simply kicked out of the palace. Moreover, Liliana was already used to enduring it, since her sisters treated her in a similar way at home. The maid reported the incident between the two young ladies to the emperor. Heliocarlo was puzzled that Liliana had been slapped in the corridor of the Emerald Palace. However, all the maids had seen every detail and would be able to confirm. Liliana woke up and found herself completely alone in the room. Although she had asked not to be disturbed, as she wanted to rest in peace, Sophia had to come at the first call. The princess looked in the mirror to check the condition of her cheek. The swelling had already gone down, as they had dealt with it quickly, but the redness still remained. Liliana started knocking on the door and thought it was Sophia. However, she did not expect to see the emperor in front of her. His bright blonde hair appeared dark because of the backlight, but it was still beautiful, his blue eyes shining and not at all dulled by the darkness. Liliana blinked and bowed as low as she could. His Highness had heard that the princess had not left her room since morning. The girl replied awkwardly that she had been feeling unwell, but that she was much better now. The emperor looked at the princess with disbelief, which made her even more embarrassed. Liliana asked what brought His Highness to her at such a late hour. Helio pointed out that he didn't need a reason to enter his wife's room. His Highness also added that there was one reason why the emperor might visit his wife's room. These words left Liliana stumped, and she immediately began to consider her options. The girl imagined herself in a courtroom. On one side was the defense, on the other side the prosecution. The defense suggested that the emperor had come to simply inspect the room. Since it was Helio who had allocated the room, he decided to make sure everything was okay. The prosecution protested, as there was no point in visiting a woman's room at such a time. It was obvious that the emperor had come for what a husband and wife were doing together. The defense argued that it was indecent and that Liliana wanted to avoid it, and that such attempts were unlikely to correct the situation. The defense assured that they needed to find a way out of this trap because they didn't even have the drugs yet. The emperor noticed that the princess was thinking about something. Her face was so red that it looked like it was about to burst like a ripe watermelon. Helio calmly watched the entire process of Liliana's expression of despair. And he even wondered how often she used her tiny head and whether the top of her head was smoking. The emperor touched the princess's cheek, which had been hit by Visty. After that, Liliana immediately came to her senses and jumped up from His Highness as quickly as she could. However, the emperor got up from the bed and went back to the princess and touched her cheek. Liliana's heart was beating like crazy. Although the man in front of her was handsome, wonderful, and charming, it was a matter of life and death. Liliana tried to fend off the emperor's display of affection. It seemed extremely strange to her, considering that they were unmarried. Helio coughed into his fist and laughed. Then he touched the girl's cheek again, only this time with his finger. Now Liliana seemed much more interesting to him than she had been before. Liliana closed her eyes and screamed. The emperor explained the purpose of his visit. It turns out he wanted to find out if anyone had done anything to the princess because her cheek was swollen. Liliana tried to excuse herself by saying that she had fallen. She hesitantly claimed that she had hit the floor, then took it back and said that she had crashed into the wall because she wasn't looking where she was going, which seemed almost true. The emperor stood silently, watching the girl, who in turn could not understand why Mrs. Gaviel had not blown up a scandal out of this. And literally immediately after that, Helio asked about the Duchess. He heard that Vista was at the palace and asked if she had hit the princess and if the maids had said that she was to be the next Duchess. Liliana nodded gloomily. The girl also added that this was why she had endured it and would continue to do so in the future. The emperor did not understand why the princess would do this. Helio is sure that it is not necessary to endure when you are provoked. Liliana could not believe that she was hearing this from a psychopath. The emperor added that such an act still ended badly for the princess. Helio Carlo said that he would take the girl under his protection, and she would not have to endure anything like this again. Finally, he noted that he would wait until the coronation ceremony of the empress. Afterwards, they would discuss what Liliana wanted from him today. These words greatly confused the girl, because she had not said that she wanted anything from the emperor. Instead, Helio continued to think that Liliana was behaving too mysteriously. The girl used to be very bold in speaking out to his face. Now she's all depressed just because Gaviel hit her. Helio suddenly realized that it wasn't depression, but that Liliana didn't expect protection from him, and he didn't really like that fact. The princess ate alone and reluctantly dug into her plate, after which Sophia assumed that the lady was not hungry, or that the food simply seemed tasteless. Liliana was assured by the maid that it wasn't that, but that she couldn't concentrate. The girl continued to hear a woman crying near the dining room. Sophia didn't notice anything, so the princess decided to blame it all on her fatigue from a bad day. Liliana couldn't help herself. She told the maid that she was heading to the bathroom, and she herself went to the source of the sound. Along the way, the princess discovered a door from which an even clearer sound was coming. Liliana suggested that it might be the ghost of a maid who had died working in slave conditions. She also thought that it could be a soldier from an enemy nation who had infiltrated here and was now crying over a bottle of perfume. Liliana was overwhelmed by thoughts of fear of the unknown. However, the girl tried her best to overcome them and finally opened the mysterious door. She thought she would find nothing but dust, but they saw a green fairy there. The spirit was as surprised to see Liliana as the girl herself. The princess could not believe that this beautiful little creature, shimmering with emerald light, would ever appear before her. The girl remembered the first rule of spirit control from the original story, the ability to see elemental spirits. In the novel, Lilith was a prominent spirit master. She had made a pact with two powerful elemental kings at an early age. Thinking about it, Liliana remembered that Helio had no spiritual abilities, and if it was genetic, then Lilith had gotten it from her. The elemental was delighted that a human could see her and happily asked to touch her. The spirit insisted that Liliana quickly see if she had the makings of a master. However, what a sincere surprise it was when the girl finally touched the elemental. The spirit rushed from place to place with joy, despite the fact that the chains hindered her. Finally realizing that the elemental was chained and could not enjoy its happiness to the fullest, she became sad. The princess also noticed the shackles that were attached to the spirit's fragile leg and prevented it from flying. Liliana suggested finding something to break the shackles, as she was sure she could do it. However, much to the elemental's disappointment, simple tools would not do the trick. The elemental felt a foreign spiritual power in the chains. Therefore, only a strong master of spirits, or the elemental who created them, is able to destroy the chains. Suddenly, the little emerald creature came to a realization, after which the elemental suggested that Liliana learn spiritual magic, because she had a premonition that the girl would be the one to break the chains. However, the princess knows nothing about being a perfumer, aside from what she has read in a book. Liliana awkwardly asked if there was anyone else who was eligible for the position besides her. The elemental was shocked that the girl refused the amazing spiritual magic. After all, it was she who could master these abilities, and if she made a contract with the elemental, she would be able to use his power. Liliana pretended to be surprised, although in reality she already knew this from the novel. The spirit confessed that she was a wind elemental and could control it as she wished. And if Liliana studies hard, she will even be able to fly. It was this skill that attracted the girl so much that she even agreed to cooperate. After all, if the princess could fly, she would easily escape the empire. Liliana introduced herself to the spirit and asked her name. Little Choo-Choo was very happy to meet her new potential spirit master. Liliana was dressed in an exquisite snow-white wedding dress. Her pink, airy, cotton candy-like hair was neatly gathered and secured with a veil. However, the princess's face was displeased. It was obvious that she was flying somewhere in the clouds. Choo-Choo asked where Liliana was going, all dressed up. The girl gestured for the spirit to be quiet and reminded it not to speak to her while people were around. Choo-Choo replied that she didn't care, since no one but the princess could see her anyway. Sophia noticed that Liliana had been very inattentive lately and asked her if everything was okay. The princess assured her not to worry, and at the same time she didn't understand why she needed to emphasize this, because others might think she was strange. Then the maid began to hurry the princess because today was an important day. The ceremony of appointing the princess as his wife took place in the incredible garden of the Dowager Empress. The path to the wedding altar was decorated with delicate snow-white petals. The Dowager Empress was waiting for the princess in the garden. She had heard that Liliana really liked this place, so she decided to organize a ceremony for her here as a gesture of goodwill. The princess bowed low in gratitude. The maid handed Liliana an elegant tiara, which the maid helped the princess put on. The Dowager Empress bowed to the girl in return. Her Highness suggested that it was strange for Liliana to assume the position of someone's wife without a proper wedding. The girl remarked that the Dowager Empress truly cared for her. Everyone was quite surprised that the Emperor himself had come to the ceremony. Helio Carlo looked elegant in the same snow-white suit, as if he had really come to get married. His Highness apologized for keeping him waiting. He couldn't think of a gift to choose for the ceremony. Helio held out his hand to Liliana and announced that he had decided to give himself as a gift. The couple stood at the wedding altar and took their vows. His Highness Emperor Helios took Liliana as his consort and swore to love and protect her no matter what. And today the ceremony was proof of this oath, but Lilia seemed to have no face. After this formality was over, Helio took off his glove and suggested they go to the Emerald Palace. Liliana's emotions were changing every second. She was quite surprised that the emperor would accompany her. Helio saw nothing wrong with escorting his wife to her palace. The girl began to think about how this might affect them. She had heard that it was completely unheard of for the emperor to personally attend the ceremony of being appointed as an emperor consort. Rumors of this event would spread through the court at the speed of light, and soon the entire empire of Carlo would know about it. It would obviously mean that Helio greatly valued his Empress Liliana. The girl remembered how Helio had promised to protect her. At the time, it seemed to her that the emperor had no serious intentions, but now she suspected that His Highness was planning to keep that oath. All this time, the emperor watched his new wife with curiosity until he decided to ask what she was thinking about this time, being right in front of him. Liliana awkwardly accepted His Highness's offer. After all, after receiving a slap, she had no reason to refuse his protection. Liliana extended her fragile hand to the emperor in return. With all these obsessive thoughts, the girl almost forgot to thank the Dowager Empress and say goodbye. The Empress bowed low to her husband's mother. The woman assumed that Liliana was very tired that morning, and therefore suggested that she go and rest. Helio did not listen to all these formalities and grabbed his wife by the hand and pulled her along. In farewell to his mother, he said a curt and dry wish to take care of himself. Liliana kicked like a young horse whose will had been taken away, but there was nothing she could do but submit. Instead, the Dowager Empress felt something that was either sadness or disappointment. The emperor walked sternly towards the Emerald Palace, completely oblivious to the fact that he was literally dragging Liliana behind him, who was barely keeping up with him. He grabbed the girl's hand so hard that it almost went numb. Helio scratched the back of his head in confusion and apologized, because he didn't think a woman's hand should be squeezed like that. Liliana frowned and said that she didn't need to lie. The emperor didn't understand what the empress consort meant. She then added that he should know how to hold a woman's hand. Helio, unable to contain his irritation, noted that he really had no experience in this, and then, having cooled his ardor, added that in any case he would try to improve. Liliana was confused, as she had always thought that Emperor Helio was a womanizer who had many wives, and also someone who would never listen to the opinions of others. Helio wondered if his wife would like the Emerald Palace, and if she didn't like it, he could move her to a better place. Liliana shook her head and said that was fine. The emperor hesitated because the empress consort had responded too quickly. However, she assured him that the Emerald Palace was quite suitable for her. Even though Lady Gavielle disliked Liliana, she didn't care, because the empress consort liked the Emerald Palace garden. There was plenty of space for flowers, and even a swing. Liliana added that she planned to plant an apple tree here and eat the apples. The emperor looked at her suspiciously, then asked if she would share with him. The empress consort laughed and replied that she would certainly share. Helio poked Liliana's forehead with a finger in confusion. The girl asked him to stop since she had already said that she would share. Helio, devoid of any tenderness or compassion, declared that Liliana had no choice, since nothing in the Emerald Palace belonged to her, and therefore she must understand this. The girl slapped herself on the forehead, reminding herself that she should not forget that she was dealing with an arrogant and cold-blooded emperor. Helio added that he would return to her in the evening. Liliana's heart beat faster, and she was almost speechless, because now that the ceremony of her consorting was complete, it was time to solidify her marriage with Helio. The girl ran to her room like a madwoman. She told Chuchu that they had little time and that they needed to start fulfilling the deadline immediately. A servant came to inform the emperor that his wife was ready and waiting for him. Helio immediately hurried, because if he wanted to press the kingdom of Niet, he needed an heir as soon as possible. The emperor remembered how Liliana had fought back from his touch, so he had endured and would endure until she was ready. Today he didn't mind simply teasing her. But when he entered the empress's room, he found her standing on the balcony, determined to jump. Helio was terrified and wanted to stop her immediately. However, Liliana only looked at her husband indifferently, then let go of the railing and jumped down. Helio did not have time to catch his wife and just watched as she fell. Chuchu cried unspeakably because she had let Liliana down. Her spirit was weak, but the empress assured her that everything was fine. In her semi-conscious state, the girl heard the terrified Helio calling out to her hopelessly. She couldn't believe that he wasn't indifferent to her. Once upon a time, a princess was born in the kingdom of Nieta. She was a very cute girl with pink hair that looked like cotton candy. But unfortunately, no one was happy about her birth. Her mother was the only person who was truly happy about her arrival, because her mother was an ordinary maid, and the princess was born thanks to fate. And so the princess, forgotten by the king, ate poorly and drank tea that looked like ordinary water. However, she was not upset. The girl lived in her small but extraordinary world, where every day brought new adventures, and only her mother, like the only bright star in the dark evening sky, always gave her inspiration and love. But this happiness did not last long. Her sisters mocked her and tried in every way to show her place. They did not consider her a princess, but only a vile creature. The sisters repeatedly said that her mother was simply lying and had given birth to a child by another man. And then one day, the girl couldn't stand it anymore and attacked her abuser. But at one point, the girl came to her senses and realized that she shouldn't hit her sister, no matter how terribly she treated her. After all, if she hit her, her mother would be punished. When Lillian was being punished with a cane for threatening Priscilla, she realized something. More painful than the cane blows was the sound of their mother crying. She never wanted her mother to suffer like that. Then Liliana promised herself that she would be stronger to survive, and when she recovered from the fall, the girl called her mother. Sophia was very happy to see that her mistress had finally opened her eyes. The maid was quite panicked that Liliana was sweating profusely and was about to call a doctor. However, the Empress stopped the girl, assuring her that she was fine now. Liliana asked if it was Sophia's crying she heard. The maid cried even harder, for she couldn't help but worry after the Empress had fallen from such a height. Fortunately, however, the force of the wind saved Liliana from a terrible death. Sophia, through her tears, managed to note how incredibly lucky the lady was, considering the great height of the fall. Liliana breathed a sigh of relief as she wasn't too badly hurt, but Choo-Choo was very worried. And then, in a panic, she remembered the spirit. The Empress was worried because she had no idea where Choo-Choo was now. She thought she could hear her crying from outside the window. The elemental was obviously suffering and reproaching herself for causing harm to her new friend. Liliana knew she should stay in this state for a few more days. Sophia reported that the Emperor was very angry about this incident. The girl was unexpectedly happy, because it somehow meant that his interest in her would disappear. For a moment, Liliana felt relieved. The maid came to inform the lady that His Highness the Emperor had arrived at the Emerald Palace. Liliana began to panic because why, the one who, according to rumors, was angry, had come here now. Helio, folding his hands together, said doubtfully that Liliana looked even better than he had expected. The Empress apologized for not being able to follow all the formalities due to illness. The Emperor assured her that there was no need for this and that Liliana should continue to lie quietly. He also inquired about the Empress's well-being. Instead, Lilian was interested in something else. Helio had arrived as soon as she opened her eyes, so he was already on his way, but she couldn't understand why he needed that. Helio carefully studied Liliana's face, which puzzled her greatly. After that, the girl almost completely hid behind the blanket. The Empress thought about how close Helio was to her and that they needed to keep their distance. His Highness admitted that he thought about her a lot. He was worried about the reasons why Liliana didn't want to be around him. The girl pretended not to understand what Helio meant, but he already knew that she was playing with him. Helio asked rather dryly if the fall was an accident, even though he already knew the answer. The girl turned away to avoid looking him in the eye and replied that it was an accident. The Emperor smiled slyly and declared that he had seen with his own eyes that Liliana had done it on purpose. The girl felt uncomfortable that he kept asking, even though he still didn't believe her. Helio began to consider his options. He knew immediately that it had nothing to do with his appearance, which Liliana found too self-confident. The Emperor remarked that he understood his situation perfectly. Moreover, no one complained about his appearance. Then he assumed that Liliana did not like his character, since he had already met such people. However, Helio is not sure that the real reason is this. This is evident from the way Liliana confidently and calmly communicates with him. Usually people try to avoid him for various reasons. Liliana felt embarrassed. She only talked to her mother, Lily, Sophia, and her sisters who didn't like her. And the first time she talks to someone who flirts with her. The Emperor insisted on telling him the real reason why Liliana did not want to be with him. After all, a child would give her power. Helio was in such a hurry to unite their families so that he could give Liliana power in exactly the way he could. The girl knew that and appreciated it. She had heard that he had been angry before. However, the man in front of her is genuinely interested in her intentions. Liliana suspects that Helio is not just asking her the reason and that there is something hidden behind it. But in the end, she decides to end the intrigue. Liliana confessed to Helio that she didn't need power. She just wanted to live in peace. Helio reacted calmly, but still decided to disappoint the girl. After all, it is impossible to live peacefully in the imperial palace, even if you want to. Liliana agreed with this statement, but if she had a child and didn't have enough power, then when a more noble person hit her, all she could tell the child was to endure it. But if the child dies, Liliana will be left to grieve alone. When the time comes for marriage, the child will be sold and she, as the mother, will be unable to do anything. Liliana admitted that she doesn't mind suffering alone, she can endure it, but she doesn't want to tell her child to endure it. Helio was so moved by Liliana's speech that he clenched his fist and barely held back his tears. He immediately remembered the past, in which his mother had completely ignored him. He wanted love and affection, but he was ignored and thus hurt. Helio asked Liliana if she felt the same way. The Empress asked again, but Helio decided to abruptly depart from his memories, after which he clarified whether Liliana really did not want an heir. The girl enthusiastically replied that this was exactly what she wanted, a quiet life, as if she were already dead. Helio had some kind of unhealthy fascination with the Empress's cheeks, and he poked them again. Then he noticed that Liliana was surprisingly frank, even with the Emperor himself. He understood her feelings for now, and therefore wished her a speedy recovery. Liliana asked if the Emperor was angry. Helio smiled sarcastically and asked what exactly he was angry about. That Liliana doesn't want to share a bed with him? Or is it because of her rudeness about not wanting to have an heir? The girl heard that Helio was angry, and now he was here listening to everything she said. The Emperor noted that in any case, he was not angry with her specifically. If he had been looking for someone to take his anger out on, Liliana would not have been the first candidate on his list, especially after he had seen the girl's failed attempts to escape. Helio added that if Liliana needed anything, she should call the maid, but in no case should she do anything reckless. Liliana watched the Emperor leave her room, wondering what had just happened. She couldn't quite accept the fact that Helio was truly worried about her. Sophia was shocked, and at the same time panicked by the way her mistress was communicating with the Emperor. She felt that Liliana was out of her mind if she allowed herself to communicate with him like that. Sophia, taking the Empress by the hand, admitted that she had decided everything. She agreed to get the drugs that Liliana had previously requested. Some time had passed since that day. Liliana had been receiving letters and gifts from Helio. After that incident, he had not visited her in person. The Emperor didn't quite understand what the girl would like, so he sent everything. First, it was exquisite jewelry, then elegant dresses, and now a sword. Liliana felt funny at such an unexpected combination. The Empress decided to stall for time as long as possible, and therefore wrote in her reply letter that she needed delicious food because she had not fully recovered. This way, she could buy time to find the medicines. However, Liliana was able to secretly save Chucha. The spirit was very worried that she did not have enough strength, and therefore she blamed herself for what happened to the Empress. Although Liliana repeatedly assured Chucha that everything was fine with her, the Empress remarked that the weather was incredible today, after which she invited Sophia to take a walk. The maid agreed only to go to the palace gates so that the lady would not overwork herself. Liliana sat on a bench, breathing fresh air and reconnecting with nature. From time to time, she played with Chucha. Suddenly, the elemental felt that someone was approaching them. Liliana saw a familiar silhouette among the large and mighty trees. The Empress could not believe her eyes. Only recently had she sent Helio a letter stating that she had not yet fully recovered, and a moment later he appeared before her. Liliana began to worry, seriously. She didn't know what to do, whether to run away right now, whether it was too late for that, or whether she should just stay in the room. It was as if they exchanged glances, and a second later he walked past without even coming up to say hello. This confused Liliana even more. After all, it seemed as if Helio, upon seeing her, had simply decided to run away. But an even greater surprise awaited the girl. The Dowager Empress stood before her. The Dowager Empress heard about what had happened to Liliana, and was glad to see that she was doing better. The woman came to thank the Empress. Liliana was surprised, because she had done nothing. Chu watched the conversation of the two ladies warily. In fact, the Dowager Empress was pleased that the girl had become friends with her son. The lady assured him that Helio was simply being kind to a worthless person like her. The woman noted that her child showed no pity for people, because Helio knows that such emotions are pointless. Although Liliana did not understand the depth of the meaning of the Dowager Empress's words, she knew that she should not relax too much in front of her mother-in-law. This was not one of those situations where one could calmly talk and laugh. The Dowager Empress asked if Liliana knew why the emperor followed such a rule. Liliana giggled, noting that she didn't quite realize it because of her background. After which, the woman stated that it was all because of her. This child pitied her mother, but received nothing in return. As the Dowager Empress had previously noted, she was just another bride who had been taken from another country. The woman always dreamed of returning to her homeland. Eventually, she became so immersed in sadness that she even stopped attending events and faded away every day like a candle. Deceased emperor, looking at his wife, always said, "I want an heir." He promised to bring her home if she gave him an heir. It's not hard to guess what happened next. When Helios was born, the deceased emperor told his wife that they would have to wait until the child was fed milk. Up until this point, the man had been sincere. But Helio was an unusual child, and the word talented was not enough to describe him. And it was something that everyone in the palace could see. Helio had the potential to be an incredible person, but even a brilliant child needs a mother. The deceased emperor wanted Helio to assist him in his role as crown prince, and for the empress dowager, that is, the mother, to assist her child. And when the then empress turned 19, she could no longer return to her homeland. Liliana was shocked by her age, even though early marriages and childbearing were encouraged in that era. The empress was still too young. Liliana suggested that Helio's mother must have been very confused and terrified. The woman pointed out that youth did not excuse mistakes made. However, at that time she was very afraid of her husband, and her child was very young. Even when Helio was sick and needed his mother very much, she was afraid to be with him. She simply stood by the door while Helio desperately called out to her. Thinking about it now, the Dowager Empress realizes that she had made a great mistake against the deceased emperor. At one point, mother and son treated each other as if they were invisible. When Helio returned from the battlefield, the only greeting they exchanged was at the palace gates. Then Helios started a rebellion. He seized the throne and told the empress that she would become a widow and would never be able to return to her homeland. The woman was quite terrified. When she heard this, she realized that everything she had done had come back to her 100-fold. And Helio was also filled with anger, like her. After this story, the woman asked if Lilian understood why she was being told this. The girl knew that this was not some advice that they decided to share with her. This frank story needed something in return. However, Liliana was not ready for such a condition, so she replied that such an insignificant person as herself should not interfere. The empress added that she did not believe that all the blame lay on the shoulders of the empress dowager, but she would not want to blame everything on the young emperor. Liliana assured the woman that this was too complicated a question for someone as simple-minded as her, and therefore asked her not to continue. The Dowager Empress remarked that the king of Nieta was cruel, who abandoned Liliana, and she understands her and therefore does not ask for too much. Liliana, sitting on her knees, wanted to stop the Dowager Empress. At the same time, the woman wanted to get her to her feet, because Helio, upon learning of this, might become angry, considering her mother an evil mother-in-law. The Dowager Empress never got what she wanted and was left to hopelessly stare at the trail of her last hope of returning to her homeland. Liliana decided to send Sophia to rest so that she could think things through. If she did choose the culprit, the deceased emperor fully deserved severe punishment. On the one hand, Helio is not guilty. He alone carried the burden of revenge on the Dowager Empress. Can such a child be blamed for anything? Liliana doesn't want to forgive her father and doesn't even want to repair her relationship with him. And she assumes that Helio feels similar emotions. If you had to choose a side, the one closest to Liliana was the Dowager Empress. Chu tried to bring the girl back to her senses because she wanted to avoid Helio, not think about him, and even less admire his beautiful face. Liliana did not know what to do. She felt hopeless. After a few days, the Empress began to practice spiritual magic. Gradually, she begins to understand more and more, although spiritual magic is more complicated than expected. The maid interrupted the Empress's lesson to report a recent incident. The Dowager Empress had prepared and sent a pile of food to the Emperor. Liliana was glad that the woman was at least trying, right up until she found out that Helio had thrown it all away. Liliana was extremely shocked by this stunt. Although Helio could be understood, it was not worth going to such extreme measures, and one should also think about public opinion. At the same time, Liliana did not want to deal with this situation, as she had rejected the Dowager Empress's offer. She ordered the blacksmith to leave her alone. Liliana kept saying that throwing away food was a waste. Chuchu noticed Liliana's anger over Helio again. The spirit guessed that the lady liked Helio, but she didn't want it to be true. Hearing this, Liliana screamed at the top of her lungs, which attracted the attention of the maid, who had not yet left the room. Now the maid would think the Empress was strange. Liliana awkwardly assured the maid that everything was fine and asked her not to delay. The Empress reminded the elemental of her request not to speak to her in front of the others. The girl was interrupted right in the middle of the lesson, so they had to start all over again. When Liliana was learning spirit magic, she felt like she was being held down by snakes. This incredible energy seemed to pass by the girl, and she felt as if she was about to break the shackles. Chuchu was happy with the girl's success. She was sure that next time everything would work out. Liliana was doing everything very quickly, as if she had a talent. Now she could escape. All she had to do was concentrate on increasing her strength. After some time, Helio and Liliana were having tea, and at one point the Emperor stunned his wife with a request. He wanted, or Liliana allowed him to sleep with her. The Empress asked in confusion to make sure she understood correctly. Helio declared that the elderly raccoon, referring to his mother, would not be far behind him. He wanted to escape somewhere, and so he hopes that his wife will hide him in the Emerald Palace. The Emperor did this by throwing away all the food the Empress Dowager cooked. He was furious that his mother kept trying, even though he repeatedly showed her that it was futile. Liliana suggested that Helio sleep in some other convenient place. She was sure that he would not like it in her palace. The Emperor knew what the girl was thinking, and so he immediately declared that he would not lay a finger on her. He was sure that Liliana had never met an emperor who was as observant as he was. Although Helio did not give up hope of wooing his wife, she only continued to be embarrassed, which amused the Emperor even more. Liliana couldn't help but notice how charming Helio was smiling. His smile was seductively radiant, and she wondered if the sacred paintings were as beautiful as this moment. Helio noticed that Liliana was daydreaming about something and drew attention to it. The Empress turned away excitedly so that her husband would not see how much her face had blushed. The Emperor approached his wife with admiration and continued to watch her reaction. Then he noticed that she looked like a chicken in this dress. It was a dress that Helio had sent personally, and a lot of effort had been put into making it fit. The Emperor, with a sly smile, asked what Liliana had meant when she shouted, "No." Helio assured his wife that she should not pretend, after which Liliana said that she would allocate a separate room for him. However, the Emperor refused, because rumors would spread. He smiled mysteriously and said that they would have to spend the night in the same bed without protest, and as he promised, he wouldn't touch Liliana, because a woman who disliked him wasn't interesting to him. Helio laughed that Liliana wanted to go down in history as the empress who had banished her emperor. The girl assured him that she didn't care how she would look in history. Liliana could not imagine what dizzying rumors would spread throughout the empire tomorrow, but she decided to agree because Helio was unlikely to let her down and break his promise. After which the emperor stunned his wife again, saying that he didn't mind doing it today, but she would find out more later. In the meantime, she could not worry, change her clothes, and go to bed. Helio, comfortably settled in bed, was reading a book with rapture, while Liliana, lulled by incessant thoughts, tried in vain to fall asleep. She sincerely appreciated the patience of her husband, who had accepted her stubbornness. The emperor noticed that Liliana was thinking about something again, and assured her not to worry and to go to sleep. When Helio wanted to ask something else, the girl panicked and turned on her side and wished her good night. Helio watched Liliana curl up into a ball like a funny squirrel hiding from the world. He really needed an heir, and bringing a hostage here didn't seem like a difficult task. But if the emperor acts by force, he will be hated, although it should not mean anything to him or bother him at all. Helio covered Liliana with a blanket, and her eyes opened sharply in surprise. For some reason, Helio doesn't want Liliana to hate him, so if he wants an heir, he should find another way to her heart, such as making her fall in love with him. Liliana felt embarrassed that Helio was so close to her face. She began to panic more than ever. The emperor covered her with a blanket to keep her cool. The girl couldn't understand where such unusual kindness had suddenly come from. But Helio savored the moment, watching his wife's strange reaction. Liliana stood up to be on her husband's level and asked why he was so kind to her. Helio moved even closer to his wife, as if about to kiss her, but then abruptly pulled away. All because tomorrow he would finally be free from that hated food aroma. Liliana frowned, because this answer completely surprised her. She had expected something completely different. And Helio read it in her eyes. Liliana was nervous and tried to justify herself somehow. The emperor added that the whole world considered him a heartless son, but it seemed that Liliana did not think so. Helio heard the story in detail that his mother told Liliana. The empress remarked that it was a tragic story. After which the man asked why she had refused his mother. Liliana felt as if her world had collapsed. The question was so unexpected that she trembled in her seat. After a brief pause, she looked up at the emperor and decided to be open like never before. She believes that what happened to the Dowager Empress is truly terrible, but she does not think that this completely absolves the woman of responsibility for her actions. No one can call His Highness heartless, for nothing in the world can capture the full depth of his suffering. Only he knows how hard it is to bear this burden. Liliana sat on her knees, her head bowed. She didn't like talking about it, but you can't just get rid of this topic. I want it to be reckless, but she wants to be frank. Helio grabbed his wife by the face, looking her in the eye, and asked if she had truly felt sorry for him. For a moment he realized that she had been wrong. However, it was too late to back down. She felt sorry for Helio's childhood. Liliana understood him perfectly and what it meant to be abandoned by her father. Helio released Liliana, then lay back down in his seat. The Empress began to suspect something, why he had let her go so easily, and perhaps had already forgiven her. The Emperor asked if Liliana was going to sleep, to which the girl answered enthusiastically that she was not. Helio remarked that she should not bow down with her injuries. He recalled that Liliana's father couldn't even remember her name. In fact, Helio, aware of the subtleties of his wife's life, knows many other unexpected details about her native country. The Emperor, with tenderness in his voice, expressed his understanding to Liliana, insisting that she rest. She noticed that Helio smiled, and this gave her hope. Everything was not so bad. Helio said with an ironic smile that his wife seemed to be drawn to him more strongly today. And finally, Liliana decided to open up and talk about her deep feelings. If they have a baby, she dreams that the Emperor will not remain indifferent. After all, a child born to two estranged parents can feel lonely and rejected in the world. And this prospect is very upsetting to Liliana. Of course, she will do everything possible to avoid having a child, but if there is a chance that everything will turn out like in the original story, the throne and the crown do not matter. Liliana asked Helio to make sure that the child would not be lonely. She sincerely wished that this little one lived a happier life, after which the girl wished good night again and went to bed. The Emperor looked at his wife suspiciously. It seemed to him that his wife was speaking as if she would not exist in the future, as if, after the birth of the child, Lilian would disappear somewhere. In the morning, the Emerald Palace is very quiet. When Liliana woke up, she noticed that Helio was again absorbed in a book. She had the feeling that she had not slept, and the Emperor was already shining so brightly in the morning. The Empress remarked that there was no point in waking up early if there was nothing to do. If she didn't have to meet with the Empress Dowager, she would never complain about oversleeping. Helio sarcastically pointed out that it was only natural for a girl to grow up with so much sleep. Liliana glared at him indignantly, as if he were provoking her, but he was just laughing at the moment. Liliana pointed out that Helio looked happy that he finally wouldn't have to endure the Empress Dowager's food. Immediately after that, the maids brought in the breakfast tray. They pointed out that this food had been given by the Dowager Empress. Instantly, the Emperor's expression changed, and it became clear how deeply he despised his mother. The dishes looked quite appetizing to Liliana. Therefore, the Emperor suggested that his wife eat them completely. However, the girl noted that she usually did not eat such a large breakfast. Helio added that Liliana had no choice, so she had to eat and then tell the old woman that she had ruined the entire breakfast, because her mother had to know that he hadn't even touched it with a finger. The Emperor declared that from now on he would give everything the Dowager Empress sent to Liliana and ordered her mother-in-law to be informed of this. However, the girl was desperate to avoid getting involved in their quarrels.